Oops. Hello, Crim 11. Here we go. Alright, so here's our first, I guess, online lecture. So, hey guys, I miss you all. Chapter 10 is our next chapter. It is gangs and delinquency. I typically skip through all these, you know that, so I'm going to keep on skipping through. So, learning objectives, we're going to find out about the nature and extent of gang activity and the types of gangs that are in the United States. The development of gangs. Okay, so there's a lot to the history of gangs in the United States. It's not just the Bulldogs or the Crips or the Bloods or MS-13 or any of that kind of stuff. It started a long time ago, even in the very beginning of our history here in the United States. So this particular slide is talking about kind of what we now equate gangs with, but typically a lot of gangs have dealt with drug activity. Gangs and drugs kind of go hand in hand. Gangs selling drugs kind of go hand in hand. We always talk about my favorite period of time, the crack era. The crack era was a time for drugs, I mean, not for drugs, well, for drugs too, but for gangs to really grow within the United States, because crack was so highly addictive and people were so desperate for it that they were willing to do just about anything to get it. So, ooh, nice tattoos. Okay, so the development of gangs in the United States. So early on in the United States, and pretty much in any culture, you have gang activity. In the United States, some of the first gangs were Irish gangs, because when a new group of people, different culture, moved into the United States, they oftentimes had trouble fitting in. So they would band together and oftentimes become involved in illegal behavior when they came here. So what does it say? Youth gangs seem to have spread into New England in the early 1800s. So again, it kind of has to do with a lot of immigration, people coming from other countries, typically were how it kind of started. 1920s through the 40s, gangs were often young kids that were doing kind of stupid things on the streets. But if you'll think about this time, this is about the time when Prohibition came into play, and Prohibition was a time when alcohol was illegal in the United States. And as you can imagine, selling alcohol and making money off of that business is something that gangs got into because it was illegal behavior and people wanted their booze, so they were willing to spend money on booze. Blah, 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 1950s. When you watch, I don't know if you guys have seen The Outsiders? You probably all read that book at some point in life. But, you know, when kids used to get involved in fights, it was typically a fist fight. Maybe someone had a knife, but probably not. But it's so much easier now at this time in our society for people to get their hands on guns that whole vibe has changed as well. Modern gangs, the development of modern gangs started about in the 1960s. And drugs were really kind of one of the thriving factors for them. Expansion of violence and criminal street operations. Again, crack cocaine. The gangs became so heavily involved in crack cocaine. If you've ever seen, and you probably haven't seen this movie either because you're all young, but New Jack City. I think Chris Rock is in that one. And it was a really interesting movie that talks about that whole crack era and how the sale of crack cocaine really started to push gangs into becoming more violent and more widespread. So 80s and 90s, again, we're still talking about the crack era, cocaine, gang members being heavily involved in drug sales, but they were also doing things like protecting their neighborhoods. They wanted to be the only ones that were selling cocaine out of such and such neighborhood or apartment building or whatever. So they were going to kill each other to protect their money and their income. Present gangs, whew, y'all are probably, we all live in the Central Valley, so you're probably pretty familiar with the whole concept of what gangs look like now in the United States, and certainly in Fresno. A lot of gangs are broken down kind of by ethnicity, but in Fresno, because I think we're such a diverse community, we got all kinds of different racial and ethnic backgrounds in all kinds of different gangs. Now, typically you would say kind of like a black street gang or a Hispanic street gang or an Asian gang, but they're not as cut and dried as they used to be. Working at Hoover, I would see a lot of my Hispanic young kids that went to Hoover High School that were gang members in Southeast Asian street gangs, which I always thought was it was interesting to me that although typically they're going to go among kind of the racial or ethnic lines, it's not always that case. Certainly not in our area. Gang membership in the United States is at its lowest point in nearly a decade. These people obviously don't live in Fresno, so but that's according to your book, and it is nationwide. So we obviously see quite a significant amount of gang activity still in the Fresno area, and I think we've talked about a lot of the things that make Fresno such a hotbed, a perfect storm for gang activity. Number one, we have such great access to roads of transportation to get us from, Mexico to the Oregon border. The freeways that go through our area are excellent ways for drugs to be transported. And now gangs are also transporting, doing human trafficking and transporting girls all over the place too, to make money off of prostitution. So we see a lot of it in our area. We have a lot of poverty in our area. We have a lot of people who are, I don't want to say transient, but they move around a lot because of the crops and where things are, where work is available. Sometimes we have people who are here working in the Central Valley because we have so many opportunities for agricultural workers, but their families might be someplace else. So they have to deal with the loneliness and the sadness of being alone. So there's so many reasons. We have a lot of parents who are, will you close my door, please? Sorry. We have a lot of parents who are out in the fields working all day, and they're, trying to do their best to earn a living for their families, and their kids are at home unsupervised. And the gang members know that, and they definitely would love to swoop in on anyone they can get. So anyways, profiles of gang members. So smaller the community, the more likely members are to be young. Race and ethnicity, the majority of gang members throughout the United States are non-white. Size of the gang, the sizes can vary based on many things, how big the city is, all that kind of stuff. So commitment to the gang, you have your hardcore gang members, and you have your associates and people like, I back the Bulldogs. I used to get that all the time. I would ask, are you a gang member? No, but I back the Bulldogs, or whatever. How much impact does the gang have on its members? A lot of times I would see for the young people who maybe didn't have a lot of support at home, the gang members, the gang was their life. So I think it kind of depends on the circumstances as to how involved people are with the gangs. I also noticed, I thought was really interesting, the smaller towns. In the smaller towns, the gang members were so much more hardcore, so much more dedicated to the gang than I would see in like Fresno, for example. I had a couple of probationers who came from small towns, and they would, walk through fire for their gangs. And it seemed like the members of the gangs from Fresno, the bigger city, were, a little less involved, dedicated. I don't know. So why do people join gangs? We've talked about this before, and I think you all know there's a lot of reasons why. Money is one of them. Power, protection, popularity. Pretty much, I mean, just sometimes people are attracted to gangs because that's all they know. Their whole family are gang members. So these are some of the reasons why we have gangs. There's just some numbers for you. Gang activity down as of 2011. Race and ethnicity, you'll see Hispanic or Latino is probably the highest number. Black or African American, next highest. White, and then other. So there's kind of a little chart for you. There are different methods of recruitment. I'm going to kind of, if you want to pause and read this, you can. I'm going to skip through this. Nature and extent of gang activity. Street gangs' clothing, colors, and hand signs have traditionally been held sacred by gang members. You're all probably familiar. If you're a Bulldog gang member, you're probably going to have something on you that says Bulldogs, Fresno State, whatever, or you're going to have red on, or you might have a tattoo, or of a dog paw, or the Fresno State logo, which unfortunately the street gang basically took over. Each gang has its own way of representing. Some of them have certain handshakes, or they're they throw gang signs with their hands, they make symbols, whatever. They wear different colors, that kind of stuff. If a gang member violates certain norms or expectations, he or she receives a violation. So this could be a person, getting a beat down, or it could be a person getting killed if they don't do what they're supposed to. Violation usually means a physical beating. Second or third violation could result in a gang member being killed. These are all kind of characteristics of the urban street gangs. I'm going to kind of go through this one. So how do they start? Implementation. Thinking of I think we've talked about the city of Mendota, and some MS-13 gang members somehow made their way to Mendota. So what they did in Mendota was try to recruit there. Very, small town, high poverty rates, lots of agricultural workers. They were able to expand there and offer some people in that community something that they might have never thought they could have. Things like power and drugs and money and that kind of stuff. So while they're there, they get organized. They intimidate the community. Obviously, I think we're pretty clear that happened in the poor city of Mendota. They expanded their drug markets, took over the city, and the community started to deteriorate. So that whole, it was pretty insane the way the gangs came in and basically went through this exact chart number by number and took over the city of Mendota. I believe they're still there. I know that the sheriff's department has made some progress, but anyways, we'll move on. We already talked about this. Female delinquents, gangs. There are females, obviously, in some gangs. These were really sad to me because I would see a lot of these in my own experience at Hoover, and unfortunately the girls were so dedicated to the gang and the boys just used them for sex, and it was pretty sad and frustrating. But adolescent females are connected to adolescent male gangs. Studies have determined that involvement in gangs for both males and females increase the levels of delinquency and substance abuse. Probably common sense there. Girls typically age out of gangs before boys. A lot of times girls are going to end up having babies and then they kind of drop out. Females join gangs for the same basic reasons as boys. Why do gangs form? A lot of reasons. Yeah, I'm kind of... What can police do to combat the growing influence of street gangs? This is a tough one. Like, even trying to get people out of the gangs, it's not easy. Especially if you live in Mendota and you're trying to get out of the gang and you can't move out of Mendota. It's really hard because you're surrounded by a very small community and everybody knows who you are. And getting out of the gang is probably not much of an option if you want to stay alive or you want your family to stay safe. So this is a pretty tough call, pretty tough thing to do. And that's it for chapter 10. Awesome. Here we go.